this is actually where it all kind of came to be as a collaboration. My friend Orville Schell from Asia Society had hatched this plan for the idea of communication, and how do we communicate between cultures, perhaps through culture. Maybe that is another way. And we'll ask Orville in 1 second to really expand on what drew him there. But indeed, last year, right at this time, I had an email from our mutual friend Yo-Yo Ma saying, you should speak to Orville Schell. He's got this idea that I'm involved in. Maybe you want to be a part of. And you can read all about it in the Aspen Idea magazine and some photos. And we're going to show you a little video in a moment so you can be in Beijing too with us. But indeed, it happened here. Orville said, shall we work together? We met with Elliot. Next thing you know, it's just rolling. Artists are being brought into this equation. We end up in Beijing for 4 days of discussions on movies and food and dance and music and how we see each other, which is the discussion of this topic that we're addressing today. And it culminated in a performance. And it was not just a performance, it was a collaboration, which really in the end was the point. And in so many ways, it's the point of the Ideas Festival. So when we looked to how we continue this dialogue, we thought, well, let's continue it here at the Ideas Festival and bring more artists, different artists, and continue those discussions. Orville, did I summarize it somewhat?
That's a good start.
Well, you know, I thought, would you like to introduce the panel first?
Sure.
Yes.
Let me just say one thing. You know, this was a rather serendipitous thing that just sort of evolved and happened. And I think it grew out of a recognition that many of us are having, particularly as we see Washington in a state of paralysis, that, you know, policy can only go so far. And in fact, very often working exclusively on policy questions is extraordinarily dispiriting, because very often nothing happens. So it was our conceit, and it was great to run into Elliot and to find him sharing in this idea that maybe what we really needed to do was to both seek some enjoyment, something that we could actually find pleasure in, but also help lay down a kind of a foundation of a more collaborative nature between US and China. We've all been doing this for years. It can be very contentious, sometimes quite toxic. And you know, the reality is that governments end up with all the unsolvable problems. And if you leave the entire relationship to governments, you end up with a lot of dead ends and a lot of difficult, unsatisfied negotiators. So that was the genesis of this whole idea. And I think you'll see in a minute in a little bit of what happened in Beijing. But let me introduce everybody. Hu Shuli is one of the preeminent editors in the media world, the editor of Caixin magazine, a weekly magazine on business, finance, and many other things, and an old friend of ours, and somebody who's really pioneering media in China. Vishaka Desai is the president of the Asia Society and my collaborator in many conspiracies. Madam Li Xiaolin runs the Friendship Association, with whom we've had a very successful partnership, and which, without whom our November in Beijing would not have been successful, or indeed even happened at all. And Wu Tong is an amazing musician. He's a classical musician, plays the sheng, which is a Chinese, he'll have to describe it, it's a wind instrument. But he's also, you know, a composer, a rock and roll singer, but an exquisitely elegant, wonderful musician. And Damien Wetzel has been introduced. So Damien, should we show a little?
Yes, why don't we go to Beijing for a few minutes so you can see what went on. As I said, there was a series of discussions, and they were not statements, which is I think what Orville was implying as well. This was an opportunity to have real meaningful discussions in a sense that were challenging and collaborative. Everything from looking at films and the different ways that films are produced in China and the US, and the strictures that are different between the countries. So it was a very frank, open discussion. And it ended up being a true collaboration in the final performance, which was initially, and this was the source of much tension actually in some ways, but tension is how you learn about each other. I think that there was an intention that Yo-Yo was going to give a concert. it was a concert, quote unquote, and so we would have Bach, you know, and it would be concert. But our idea really was a collaboration that was going to be interactive with the audience, and there would be elements of surprise and risk, which are all things that, you know, we brought with us that we tried to share and drag everybody else in with us, including the audience. So why don't we watch this video if we're ready and queued up, and then we'll resume the discussion. Participatory experience. It's not simply that people sit down and are entertained or moved. It's that they feel they're a part of it. And so we designed this from beginning to end to have that quality. Whether it was, you know, Wu-Tang and Little Buck coming through the aisles, or me teaching serenade to the entire house, you know, 2,000 people standing up and doing a Balanchine ballet.
And prepare to dance.
It is not your business to determine how good it is. To keep the channel open.
Goodbye. You know, some of it just incredible, unexpected things, you know, that, you know, completely unscripted, you know, that business with Meryl bowing to Yo-Yo and then, you know, lying down on the stage to bow to each other, which, you know, if you'd planned, probably wouldn't have felt right.
Projects like this are complex. It takes many, many people to really make it a great success.
中美两国文化交流的历史源远流长。中国是世界上最古老的国家之一，美国则是一个年轻的国度，其文化多元，并带着强烈的时代气息。
So that gave you a small idea of the culmination. There's many things obviously left out in a short video like that. We mentioned partnerships. We were partnering with Central Conservatory in China. We had a host of young musicians who came and played with Yo-Yo and worked on things with him. We had the great player Chen Lei-ji working with Yo-Yo as well in collaboration. And the whole point of it really was a certain sense of challenge and risk. And I think that's where, as I said, where we learned a lot from each other. Wu Tong here, you saw, now you've seen the Sheng, if you didn't know, you saw it, was challenged with opening the program in the unorthodox way of actually coming through the audience and surprising them with his presence right from the very beginning, which set the tone. And Wu Tong works with Yo-Yo here in the United States. He works in China, and I think to have him here as part of this is a particularly apt person who works in both places and has opinions, obviously, on how his art is informed, but also how it relates to people. So I thought, Wu Tong, your comments, anything on the experience in Beijing or working? He just came from Tanglewood this afternoon. It's a rich life in the arts here. So what do you have to say about working in different places and how people look at you as an artist, maybe, do you think?
I think I'm very lucky to join the Silk Road project. Also, the event also happened today. And in past 13 years, I work with Silk Road, with Yo-Yo, and I see a lot of a different way from music. It's all about music. I feel it's how amazing stage. And here, as I can have ability and a chance, can make the infinity dream become true. So I think the first thing is I feel here the audience was really have the open will. Also, another side is have a lot of the open will the musician I can work with.
In China?
In here.
Here in the United States.
In here.
Yeah.
I mean, what happened from here, I feel. So that means is, sometimes I travel a lot from the more than 20 different countries. Some countries, the people, the audience was when they say some strange thing on stage, like my instrument, like many bamboo, many pipe, I just hold on and blow. So that just become a little bit, not a little bit weird, the film. So I just sometimes I play, the people will laugh. It's just be laugh. So what can I do? Maybe also I get another idea is maybe I can custom like a panda. I can eat the bamboo. But here, I have a lot of people is really open the culture, the stomach, can share also very interesting what's strange from out of country. So this is a really wonderful thing, what I feel. Yeah.
Okay. Orville, do you think in your many years going back and forth that this is a common thing between the U.S. and China audiences?
Well, I hope so. I'd be curious to hear Vishaka and Madam Lee, who were both there and saw it. The question that I always ask, is cultural exchange worth anything? What does it really do? Does it matter? Is it just sort of epiphenomenal, a sideshow? Or does it actually help condition what goes on between countries? And they're trite to say, but there are no two countries in the world who are more, it's more essential that they learn how to interact better than the US and China.
Well, I think that's a very important question. We were just talking about it before we started, that often we have this feeling that arts and culture ought to make a difference. We believe it. And yet, when you have policy dialogues, policy people absolutely pay very little attention to culture. So one of the questions that I think we have to recognize is that, first of all, the capacity of the arts. As you were saying, Wu Tong, that arts have a way to transcend language barrier, especially music or visual arts. It can connect people because you're not as much limited by the language. And yet, at the same time, what that connection is hard to figure out. So people don't know how to actually think about it in a kind of analytical way. And yet, if we don't work harder to get arts and culture more center stage into the discussion of international relations, we will be a sideshow, I'm afraid. So we have to work at that particular strategic points of connection. I think the fact that Secretary Clinton really has paid a lot more attention to people and public diplomacy. She's paid a lot more attention to actually thinking about these kinds of interactions as important part of her agenda does make a difference. And what we have to make sure is that that kind of complementary thinking comes together, because without it, we all can go to wonderful concerts, and I often call it cultural consumption. You know, you go to a concert, it's very nice. I go to a museum, it's very nice. I haven't thought about what it really means. So we have to do extra work there.
So that raises an interesting question. I wanted to ask you, Li Xiaolin, this question. What effect did this have on the Chinese? What was the reaction to this?
I've been working with the Friendship Association for almost 37 years. The association was established in 1954. So the objective of the association is to promote friendship and mutual understanding between the Chinese people and other peoples in the world. So one of our works is to promote cultural exchanges. That is very important. For example, at this time of the, I think what I mean is that with the fast development of high tech, people do use mobile phones and do use internet. However, I personally feel we still need heart-to-heart talk and eye-to-eye contacts. Through what? Because we do have kind of language barriers, and each country has its own historical and cultural backgrounds. However, music, art can connecting people very easily. Because I would like to show example. Yu Yu Ma, for the last year, for the first cultural dialogue, was in Beijing, and he played violin. And he played a music actually from our Inner Mongolia. But famous American dancer, Mr. Barry, danced with Yu Yu Ma's music. That was very touching. The name of that dance was called the Dance of the Swan. 6 minutes, everybody, just touched the hearts. You could never forget it. That's the strength, the power of the culture, of the art. So I'm very happy to be here today. And we are expecting the next cultural dialogue between our two countries in Beijing next year. I think it's very important for both sides of the people, to share and enjoy this kind of art through our hearts. That's very important.
Shuli, you're in the media. Did the media pay much attention to this?
I think it's a very interesting question, because we are mainly in the business and financial sector, our media, but we put a lot of coverage on this exchange program, because it's really interesting, not only among the cultural people or young people, actually. It's interesting for including I should say the business elites as well. So it becomes very interesting. But I want to extend the concept of culture in a rather large way, because before I came, I did a little survey among friends and colleagues on what they think they found fascinating about the United States. Because of your question about the panel, so I asked them, and because my survey is from different age groups and various jobs, and the people like Chinese people in their 20s, the key words are American universities and movies. And the entry and middle-level professionals mentioned more about American goods. from cosmetics to high-tech gadgets, and also American movies.
So objects and movies.
Yes,
Things,
yes, high-tech,
American business.
high-tech gadgets and also movies. And for rather established crowd, actually the learning ways of United States was of interest. For financial professionals, they are more interested in what Wall Street Journal. What's wrong? I'm sorry. What published about about financial news, but also they learned what kind of new financial products they can learn from. And for government officials, they study legislation and regulations. And the Foxing Media Group, including me, we want to introduce ethical and quality standards to China. But also, many times a year, we watch American movies. So it's kind of everything is related with culture factors, but also rather larger perception.
Yeah, I think that was, that was the intention from the beginning. We suffered a little bit over the title. It started as, I believe, arts and literature, perhaps, and then we finally said, no, it's arts and culture, because it's culture writ large. It was Alice Waters' cooking. It was discussions about painting. It was discussions simply about who we are and how we view creativity in terms of an educational framework. One of the first sessions we had, sort of similar to this, in fact, a pre-session, talked about, we had a panel discussing the ideas that we grapple with as societies. Are we creative? Are we doing the right things? Or the way we educate our children? And very different worries from both sides. But what I picked up on now in this discussion really was, in this title that we created, I want to add what really fascinates us about each other. Because I think that cultural exchange, to be successful, essentially, is covert, frankly. It's the overt attempt to say, look, this is what we do really well, this is who we are, is very difficult to actually make a connection. It's the covert. If you look back, for instance, at the things that went on between the US and the Soviet Union, it was, there were great things done, but it was about the people who performed sometimes more than their performances. Or throughout the world, the jazz tours, where the jazz musicians, yes, the music was intoxicating, but it was the fact that the jazz musicians actually spoke out and said that things were wrong in the United States, that people sat up and went, wow, okay, that's something different. So it's actually, you can't force it, is what I'm saying, and that's what's interesting.
But I think what was interesting about the November program is that often, and I dare say we Americans have this tendency that we're going to go out there and showcase our talent, right? And everybody knows us, because the truth of the matter is American movies, American culture is still much more dominant in the world. I don't think that most people in America know as much about China, and we know this for a fact, than compared to what Chinese know about America. Right. What I think was special is the capacity and the commitment to really have a collaborative process on stage, in programs, to have real discussion. And one of the things I heard from my Chinese friends was initially they were really shocked that we are at the EGG, the National Center for Performing Arts, and it is as informal as a concert. This was a huge deal.
That was a big struggle. I mean, we all worked on it, and Shen and I talking right up till the moment of the performance on how this is going to happen, because A, we were in a concert hall. Nothing else is supposed to happen in the concert hall but concert. And there we are doing these kind of things, and everybody was really pushing the outer limit. And it was a constant negotiation, and out of it, in the end, everybody kind of knew each other and learned about it, and I think everybody did change out of that, on both sides. We all bent in some way, shape, or form, but we, in the end, put our shoulders to the wheel and said, okay, we're going to do something special here. It's not normal, and we're going to learn something in the process. And that really was, I mean, Madam Lee referenced the yo-yo playing, the traditional Mongolian piece, which then he led into the Swan, which in itself is kind of a revelatory thing. Yo-yo and Little Buck, the hip-hop dancer, Memphis Juker, doing that piece kind of shocked America. I mean, it was a video that was done earlier last year that I put together for arts education, and it went to 1.5 million YouTube views the first week, and it was just a crazy thing. But in the Chinese context, it broke down the barriers completely. I mean, we began this entire thing with everything as formal and boilerplate as you can imagine. We had statements, we spoke of our mutual respect, and then the capper was Yo-Yo was going to play, and that was all going to be beautiful. And Yo-Yo did indeed play, but then Little Buck stood up from his chair and began to dance. And by the time that was over, people were hugging each other, and it was a kind of cultural mayhem. It was not, it broke it completely. And I don't know if we really didn't know that was going to happen. I guess we hoped, but just hope.
I think sometimes the best kind of cultural exchange, but actually something that doesn't come particularly naturally in China, is to just let things happen. And often when you let things happen, it's dangerous. But it's also can be quite interesting if something nice happens.
Well, and it's also beyond that, and I'd love to hear some, what Wutong maybe you want to say. But the idea, I had these conversations with Orville about the idea of not putting people in a bad position. And in the Chinese sense of saving face, or in the national sense, where you don't put people in that position where they might be embarrassed, where there's an element of risk, and risk means that sometimes it can go wrong. And we had to really persuade. We had a charm offensive on trying to get there. And I think, we were lucky to have Wutong involved, kind of in the middle, sort of, from the Chinese perspective, understanding all of that, and yet used to kind of going out on a limb with Yo-Yo. Do you feel, and we remember fighting about the sound, like how is it going to sound in the concert hall, everything, and we had your people there helping.
Is a problem.
Yeah, it was hard. It was
yeah,
hard
before
work.
the concert, it's the first time because it's a really not regular side the instrument. Sometimes when the guqin, the sound was really soft, so really need a speaker. But the National Hall never use speaker on the music hall.
Yeah, we're not allowed to use amplification there, and much of what we needed to do and provide amplification. So right there, we were in trouble.
That is a really dangerous. Almost we sound check until 10 minutes before concert, before the audience come, the open hall. So, but also that is a really interesting the detail, because one day time, some musician will be nervous, some people will getting, how can I do? Or some people will getting angry. But that time is really important. You pay a patient and understand from each other. So this is, for me, is a very important thing. Yeah.
Well, it's also, it was a citizens' movement on both sides. Nobody's getting paid here. It's this work, we're there to do, to do this, to have this collaboration. And there were great moments when we eyed each other. The great guqin player, Chen Lei Ji, let me describe this, because this was fantastic. So his instrument is quite formidable, and normally and it's very quiet, as he said, it would normally be placed in the center of the stage, enter and play. And that's just not what we were doing. We made a circle where everybody's playing together, and that first moment he walked in and he's like, no, that goes there. And we're like, actually it goes here. And this back and forth, and finally he looked at us, he looked at Yo-Yo, he looked at me, and he said, okay, I'll try this, And in the end it was this marvelous moment where they were side by side. And that really was the point. It wasn't a moment to show.
It's really important, Damien, that we need to understand that first of all, Yo-Yo, with his generosity of spirit and his experience with Silk Road, what he has managed to do is to create parity and really respect other musicians. And because of that, people would be willing to take a little more of a risk.
That's
and
absolutely
it's a
true.
very
The power of
important,
example there is
right.
really
Very important.
powerful. By the way, all of this whole concert is on Vimeo. You can watch the whole thing through, and it's quite something. Yo-Yo, is the master of ceremonies of a sort for all of this, and draws the audience along in this story, essentially, of why we were there. But we did it through the art form instead of talking about it, really.
So that, to me, one of the lessons is that it's something Orville would talk about as well, is that how do you really stay open and make sure that you have real respect for others and hear them out, so that if you have a guqin player who says, I always do it this way, how do you actually work with him to recognize that it is an American value to say we want informality? That may be just one of the values, may not be the only value. So how do you work that out? You know, it's very important, Jeff.
In China, lots of people, know Yu Ma, the name. And we know he's such a great person and so talented and so popular in the world. However, remember the first night when Ambassador Lord hosted a dinner at the US Embassy in Beijing. It lasted about almost 4 hours.
Very long
Very
for Chinese,
long
right?
for us, for everybody actually, because the food, they prepare big feast, but the service is very slow. So we had to wait for almost 4 hours. But Yu Ma was sitting just at our head table, and he was so nice, so kind. And after 4 hours, everybody must be tired. But then it turned out for both of us to go to make a toast. So Yu Ma said, whatever you say will be great. And he would be the one who would be first clapping his hands. And he did it. And he made me very comfortable. And it really left deep impression on me. And the next day, when the important members of the delegation from US to meet our state councilor, Liu Yandong, did you remember?
She wasn't going to come to the concert,
and he
right?
insisted in showing 6 minutes about that piece of Inner Mongolia, piece of the music with the dancer, Bali. And we finally persuaded our state councilor to stay for at least 60 minutes longer to enjoy that piece of art. So after our state councilor Liu watched that 6 minutes performances, she immediately decided to go to the concert on that particular night. Changed her mind immediately. She's such wonderful art. That means, as I said, the music or something could really touch your heart and change, this kind of move you, touch you, so you could immediately change your mind. That's my personal experience with Yu Ma. So and he promised me next time he comes to China, he will invite me to go to his concert. I'm still waiting. Please pass on the message to him.
We will make sure that he knows about that.
The other thing I feel is that I always talk about this kind of human exchanges, human dialogue, so important. When I was young, and we watched TV or we read the news, and we thought Americans were awful because of the Vietnam War and the Korean War. But after President Nixon's visit in 1972, and I began to work in the Friendship Association in 1975, our association was the only one at that time which could receive American friends. So each year we probably receive several hundred American visitors to China. Then it turned out completely changed my impression because Americans were very polite, well educated, always helped me since I was a little girl. They always helped me to carry my luggage. And they always let me go to the elevator first. I said, no, you go first. Then they always told me, ladies first. But in China, always leaders first, never ladies first. But after all,
Unless you're the lady leader like you are.
No. Still, that's the Chinese culture. That's a different way of treating these kind of things. The other thing is that when I studied at UCLA, California, Los Angeles, I was so well taken care of by American friends because that was in 1980s. Not many Chinese students studied in the campus of California. I was very few students coming from mainland. So I was so well taken care of because sometimes I could not follow the lectures. And my friends, because they are the members of the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association, gave me coach every weekend, helped me to pass all the exams. Finally, I got A-, and also my master's degree from UCLA. But then ever since then, I'm very much determined to do everything possible to strengthening this relationship and doing people-to-people exchanges. I appreciate very much Asia Society and Aspen Institute could do this kind of a cultural dialogue or whatever things for the relationship. I myself will be very much involved on this aspect. Yes.
I was just going to ask you with your study, and Orville might have this question too. I was just thinking, Orville, what you did and what you found out, what people's impression of America is, most of the study in America about China would become very shallow in terms of what people think of China. And most of them right now are very much somewhat ambivalent about China. And when it comes to Chinese culture, there would be very little that people would actually think about that's something they know. What do you think of that? I mean, it's sort of, one of our problems is that I think Chinese know a lot more about America than Americans know about China.
Julie, you first.
I can give you the comparison, and I think that's, I think China actually has never been, and will never be, the center of attention in the United States in the near future at least. But it's very different in China actually. I think in China, Chinese people are very interested on like what happened in the United States, and I think not only among the elites, but also among the public interest, general people. I think it's safe to say that at least half of Chinese media's international coverage revolves around what is happening in the United States. That, I think it's a continuous trend in China right now. I want to give the concept of the normalization of perceptions in China about the United States. I think actually there's one in US about China as well, but however, I want to mention the normalization. It took 7 years, like the Sino-US relationship, like normalization took 7 years. But I think it took almost 40 years to normalize the perceptions about the United States in China from the very negative, like Madam Li mentioned, like very negative to signs of goodwill, and from like unselective embrace to, I can say, a kind of more nuance, more learned exchange that acknowledges the difference between two countries and seeks out, and let's just say, seeks out of like what can be adopted in China. It's a learning course, I think. That is the perception right now in China, become calm down. Yeah. Like we could also see like a lot of like a little bit extreme discussions in internet, like, especially in, we call them microblog in China. Yeah. But if you look at the media, I think it's rather very rational most of the time, I should say. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's undeniable. You know, Chinese and Americans have had an incredibly long and complicated relationship, and it sort of oscillates back and forth between different equations of respect and fascination and love and even hate. And we've been through some very, very difficult times. And I think Americans, I mean, we're in a very self-doubting mood now, but we still don't appreciate, I think, the full measure of our soft power. And this actually is something in China today, big issue, soft power. How do you get it? And can you just go out and buy it? Can you get a public relations firm? Can you get the Department of Propaganda to get you more? Or what do you have to do to win the respect and the fascination of other countries around the world? And America often does many things that are not worthy of respect. But there's so many other things which we just sort of do automatically, which the rest of the world does respect. It's a kind of a very curious combination of strength and weakness.
It's a complicated thing, because I can say that from the media point of view, all of the interviews that I did there, inevitably it focused back to, what do you think of us? Mm-hmm. What do you think of our choreography? What do you think of our dance companies? What do you think of, you know, et cetera? After the film panel, I remember reading, I moderated one film panel, and the quote the next day was Joel Cohen was there, and Joel said something to the effect of, well, I feel that Chinese cinema is on the rise. And that was the huge pull quote. And that was very much, you know, there was a sense of, where are we in your eyes? And perhaps America doesn't, we're not asking that question as much, perhaps self-doubting more than other times. But I think the idea that China is looking to engage its soft power in exploring was present throughout that forum, and it's actually what's happening here as well as we go through the next panels. Tomorrow there'll be one on music with Elliot Goldenthal, the Academy Award-winning composer, and Wu Tong, and Conrad Tao, who's going to be playing tomorrow night at the Aspen Music Festival, and looking at Chinese and American themes in music, and are we speaking to each other really, or are we just performing for each other? What are we doing in this? Are we just trying to impress each other? Because, as I said before, I don't think that works so well, actually. Just being really good is not enough. You got to say something to each other as well.
You know, Damien, we have a perfect piece of litmus paper here at Wutong.
Yeah.
I'd be very curious, when you look now at the United States, and you work on both sides, what do you think is going on between the US and China in terms of what makes us fascinated with each other, respectful of each other, interested in each other? How does this occur to you?
For me, from the both sides to the future?
Well, start with the Chinese side.
I feel that the both country, I think, have same thing. Is a multi-minority the country, so they really have the open the material from culture, but people also really pay respect and patience to working on with me. You know, that is really wonderful thing. Sometimes I cannot imagine, like the last concert 2 days ago, and after the tango concert, when we in the dinner, some people just come with me, and he is a great the organ the musician, and we talk a lot, and I just start to know, oh, he know the organ have the Sheng influence from the first step from come to the organ, but also we have a lot of same the technique or background culture. I never know. Like I can always repair my instrument. He also can do. He also made, and my family also made instrument. Even also I can made my instrument too. So we also have a lot of things. We use the stone and we make stone and the bread, the ashes on the bread, on our reed, because when I blow in or out, will be wide, but sometimes if it's long, we cannot really move very well. So we do that. A lot of the detail is same thing. So like the word is really beautiful and really close. So that's, I feel it's a lot of that small things made me really comfortable.
I think the music piece is very interesting because to me, it seems to me that there is something about world music or whatever we call it. There's been lots of interaction for a long time. Whether you go to Ravi Shankar and Yehudi Menuhin, all the way, Beatles in India, but
Paul Simon, South Africa.
Exactly, South Africa, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and then Silk Road as well. Whereas in other traditions, whether it's dance or the visual arts, it hasn't always been the same level of openness around. I mean, I was just saying to Orville that we forget that, our appreciation of contemporary Chinese visual art is still very nascent. As early as in early 1990s, when we at the Asian Society were beginning to do contemporary art, the first thing a very senior curator in New York said to me was, how could there be any good Chinese contemporary art? Because if there was anything, I would have seen it. And I said, have you been to China? No. So why would you have seen it? Well, because New York is the center of the universe. So it's that notion of values and how we position the power dynamic, which it seems to me in music has somehow been more open in a different way that allows you to connect in a way that's different from other arts. So it's worth considering the sort of power dynamics of who thinks what of whom when we think of the arts, Yeah.
I think just a few minutes ago, some of our friends probably watched the documentary, Touching the Tigers. And that movie, based on the true flying tiger pilot, Mr. Benitez's true story. But when we discussed how to make a documentary, how to impress people. We took a long time for us to talk about that. Who is the hero? Then we talk a lot with Benitez himself, and he personally believed it was Chinese people who were actually heroes because they saved his life, or some of them were killed by Japanese aggressors. But from Chinese side, we think he is a hero because at the age of 18, smart, handsome, left home, came to China, and to a very strange environment, strangers. And while his plane was shot down by Japanese, he was in a totally strange area, and he did not know his fortune, to which direction, whether he could be saved, rescued, or being killed. So then we talk a lot about that, how to impress our American friends. At the same time, we also should impress Chinese young people to remember part of history. Here, I would like to introduce my partner, Sonia. Sonia Lee, would you like to stand up? She and I worked very hard for this documentary. Yes. And finally, when I was in Harvard University last year, and we talked about the Touching the Tigers documentary, one of the Chinese students, not American, said that it must be a propaganda. So that made me so mad. So just a week ago, I was in Harvard Kennedy School. We were co-hosting the conference about soft power. So we just showed the documentary, and many of them were cried, and they were very much impressed by the documentary. Because I think what should I say, something that can touch the hearts of the people. It depends on how you really describe it and how do you make the things make people unforgettable. Yeah. That's my own feeling about,
I think you touched on, Vishaka, talking about the power of music. I've always marveled at how we all know when something's in tune. It's something we all share. Around the globe, we know when something resolves to the proper note or not. We just do. Often in dance, I would often think, oh, we get away with murder. The orchestra makes one mistake, everybody knows it. But the dancers, you're not quite sure. Maybe he meant it, seriously. But what Wu Tong was saying was very interesting to me because what he's talking about was on a micro level. It was like musicians in one country and another understand something about each other in the same way that Shu Li was talking about it from the financial industry. When they're reading the Wall Street Journal, there's something they understand, and those are the building blocks essentially. But the question is, how does that all come together? And I do think that culture, whether it's mass culture entertainment, let's say something like movies, which everybody understands, and you can turn away, or dancing, like when Little Buck danced in something that put that over the top, because yo-yo playing, it was incredibly beautiful, but it was the addition of Little Buck that really did something special. It was a unique combination. So finding those things, often, we've talked about music in terms of relations that when everybody sings the same song, it's a cliche, but it's true. There's something about it. We know something more about each other. So these micro building blocks where we understand a little something. The visual arts was, that was a great example in Beijing because, not to get into anything thorny here, but, there's well-publicized, issues with Ai Weiwei, and he comes up in the conversation with the visual artists. And they, so they say, what do you think, And so Eric Fischl, a great American painter, and Liu Xiaodong, Chinese painter, and Liu Xiaodong is like, he's a naughty boy. It used to be, my paintings were worth more at one point, now his are. And Eric afterwards said, oh my God, typical artist. Incredible. It was nothing, it was all very, very focused in a way, and they understood each other. They spoke the same language. And it was, even on that level, there was a communication that we could all learn something from. It's interesting.
It seems to me that when culture is really effective, it's when people are doing it because they want to do it and they're enjoying doing it, that it doesn't have any other real intention. And I think that's some amazing quality that real artists have. Obviously, you want your country to look good. You want to look good. You may want to make money, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that's the kind of a quality which is very hard to talk about, and it's certainly hard to quantify. But when you see it, you know it.
That's right. Potter Stewart. You see it, you know it. We wanted to open up for some questions. We have mics in the house, and if you raise your hand, we will call and a mic will come to you. So right over here in the lime green.
Hi. You talked a lot about visual arts and music arts, and with a rich history of ceramic arts in China, and certainly within the Asia Society, and with many university programs, was that included in your exchange?
Well, Vishaka, you're the museum curator.
Right.
X.
Well, let me just say that Orville Schell is our director of U.S.-China Relations Center, had cooked up this idea with all his friends. So what happened was people kind of came together very organically. And so this particular time, ceramics was not included or as a particular art form. But it's also an interesting question because if you ask in China, ceramics as a past is a very important tradition, but it's artisans. They are not the ones who would be respected at the same level as painters or calligraphers. So in terms of the hierarchy of arts, you would have a slightly different way of thinking about it. There are some contemporary Chinese artists today, and of course you remember ASEAN that we did the exhibition, who is a Chinese Australian artist who is now reviving ceramics, and there are other artists who are doing it as well. But for this particular forum in November, we did not actually talk about that. Visual arts was also not as paramount, but going forward in the next November discussion, we will have more discussion about museums and visual arts than we did the last time around. Is that fair?
No. That's fair. Yeah. Another question, please, Jen. Mike is coming to you.
Cultural art form takes many different forms, and my understanding is that one of the connectors between China and the United States on a popular level is the influence on a massive scale of interest in China in professional basketball in the United States. And that tens of millions, I'm told, of Chinese every night watch the National Basketball Association. And that is a form of connection and learning between at least China and the United States. And I don't think yet it's gone the other way, but maybe it would. What's your feeling about that?
Yeah.
I think our young people really, not the young, actually even some of the elderly people do enjoy American NBA basketball games. So I'd like to show example, even our Vice President Xi Jinping visited in the United States last February. He went to Los Angeles and watched the NBA basketball game. Cohen was, because I'm not very good at that, but my colleague, Kobe Bryant, yes,
because he does some
I
work
was
in China.
there, but we really enjoy the atmosphere of the basketball game. But some of my colleagues could name every players from the different teams. For example, I would like to introduce my young colleague Shen Xin over there with glasses. Maybe who could also tell you about how young people love basketball game, American teams.
I think that that's a long-standing, fascination, though, between many countries, just the competitive sports in itself. We often look, when we look to popularize something, how do we make it a competition? If you look at television today, most of the popular shows in America have to do with a competition, even American Idol or something, and the idea of athletics and competition, and it seems very natural to me.
It is very important, though, to remember that actually by having Yao Ming with Houston Rockets change the equation. And Charles Foster, our trustee, who actually has worked with Yao Ming, can tell you that. But the other thing that's very important to also remember that about that time, which was late 90s, NBA took a group of people, and we worked with them, with the Asia Society, to really take, that was a very strategic move on the part of NBA to make the basketball much more popular in China through Yao Ming. So it's very important.
Even before that, after Nixon's visit in China in 1972, and the Washington Wizards came to China to give the first friendship competition with PLA Army Troop team. So when we celebrated our 30th anniversary of diplomatic relations between our two countries, a Washington Wizard came to Beijing again. So we invite these players who were at the first team, met together like a family reunion, talking about through this kind of sports activity, how people build friendship. So that's very, very interesting. The other thing, not only basketball, but also table tennis, ping pong. Yeah, that's also, even before Nixon's visit, American ping pong team came to Beijing, China. So now we still commemorate that part because all these kind of sports really help people to know each other and finally even help to promote the relationship between our two countries.
Beautiful.
Yao means very special.
Absolutely.
One more question, Dan. Mike is coming to you.
I want to share this with the audience and with you, and perhaps you'll have a reaction. I was in China about 1981 or 1982 on a very mundane mission of going around China, talking with bureaucrats about US taxation and mediation clauses in contracts. And this was obviously soon after the revolution, when the white bone devil and all of the terrible things that happened in the late 70s began to soften, and China was again interested in trading with the world. So, two things happened. It was primitive to be there at that time. The hotels were spare, and it was a paranoid environment in that we were always guarded and accompanied every place we went, and we were always guided into places where they only wanted us to be, but we had no freedom, of course. And I know China's come a long way since then. Okay, so in Beijing, we go to a Chinese acrobatic show, and there's a Mongolian dust storm brewing, and I'm sneezing and allergic to all this, and we're walking back to the hotel, and I'm really in true misery, and we pass by a neighborhood, and there's a dirt yard and a crate and a young man sitting under a bare light bulb at night playing the violin and playing a Mozart piece.
Really?
I'll never forget that because I was sick and I was tired, and there was something that you would never expect in so many, a million years. Then we were down in Hangzhou, and I got up early one morning. I couldn't sleep. There was fog over the lake, and I went out for a walk, and I couldn't see anything. I mean, it was so foggy. And I heard something like a baritone voice wafting through the fog, singing some sort of what sounded like an Italian aria. And I thought, this is so surreal. Now, I think those memories of the Western idiom in those bizarre and exotic circumstances of the time are true memories. I mean, I recognize Mozart, and I certainly recognize the difference between Asian music and my own music. And so these are true stories and true experiences, and I'm just wondering where those influences came at that time to these people in China who had been so closed off from Western culture. Does anyone have a reaction to that?
I think Orville, you should.
Well, that was just the time when China was sort of awakening to the Western world, and when Western music, which had been forbidden in the Cultural Revolution, was beginning to be appreciated. And they had one orchestra. I think the Philadelphia Orchestra had gone there in the 70s. And so there was a kind of a complete turnaround in many areas of Chinese life, not just culture. And there was, I think, this fierce hunger to sort of regain sort of stature and presence in the world and all of these sort of more global art forms.
Also, it's very important to know that in the 20th century, Western classical music was very powerful in China. And there were conservatories, people were learning that. Coming from India, it's always been a big surprise to me because in India, India was colonized, Brits were there, but Indian classical music was so strong that actually Western classical music never took hold. Compared to that, in China, Western classical music, Western ballet was huge. So that's why even Mao's wife was creating ballets that were in fact Western technically inspired.
And of course, there was the Russian
and they were for Russian,
influence.
exactly. So you have the Russian connection coming in, and even classical music that comes from Russia. But the truth is that there was a fair amount of history. It didn't come from just nowhere. And so what happens is it gets suppressed, and it bubbles up again. And that's what we have to remember, that those history things are important for us to understand.
The other thing I would like to add is that the Cultural Revolution happened from 1966 till 1976. So that 10 years, that was really the miserable time the Chinese people suffered from. Before that, and actually after that, musical school, institutes, all enroll students. And all these kind of musicians, they learn not only Chinese or Asian music, but also very much influenced by Western music. So many pieces, even they don't play in the public, they still play at home. We have you have a violin, but we have erhu, 2 strings violin. So we have our own traditional music. Right. So we try to combine the classical ones with the Asian ones, right, and also the classical and modern ones. So they really never could ban music, even during that 10 years of Cultural Revolution. That's why you still saw somebody playing at home.
It's understandable in so many ways that it was underground, essentially, and then it came back.
At
But
home.
I think equally interesting is what Orville said about the hunger that deprivation period brought. And I think that goes on to this day in many ways, about that we were deprived of this and now we want more and we want to share, and we want to also, the way Madam Lee described, adapting, taking something and making it our own in some essential way, and finding ways to express ourselves, not strictly in the idiom it was made, which is I've noticed in the dance, certainly. Maybe we have one more question, and then down in the front. Thank you. It's coming to you.
Thank you all for a very illuminating panel on crossing the cultures and communicating through the non-verbal arts of music, art, dance. But we still have the language barrier. This morning's Wall Street Journal has a story about families in America who are moving to China so that their children can learn Chinese. And the challenge is daunting. The article pointed out that it takes 2,000 hours to learn Chinese, to become fluent in Chinese, and 700 hours to become fluent in Romance languages. So would the panel discuss any further efforts to bridge this enormous language gap?
If I can, at the Asian Society, we're very proud to actually have a major national initiative to teach Chinese language in America. And we're working with Hanban, which is in fact part of the Ministry of Education, to create model classrooms in high schools that actually then can be replicated elsewhere. And we also do a national conference of all teachers, educators, policymakers, and bring colleagues from China to really talk about this. And our argument is not so much whether you're going to be completely fluent in Chinese or not, but the language is a window onto that culture and society. So even to have not 3,000 characters, but to have 300 characters, and to be able to say something, you are actually showing some respect for another culture, another society. And ultimately, we have to realize that in China, there are hundreds of millions of kids who are learning English. We will never get there. But we really have to work extra hard to create the sensitivity through language so that you actually create the language as a window onto the culture. And the explosion is huge. I mean, there is no question that we work with even less privileged schools in urban areas, Chicago, lots of other places in the South, and lots of underprivileged kids and their parents are the ones who come to say, I want my kid to learn Chinese because I know if he or she is going to be competitive, this would be a good thing for her. So the truth is that there is an awareness, but we still have a lot more people studying French than Chinese. 21st century, Spanish, I think is very relevant for this country, so I wouldn't go there, but French, I'm not so sure is as important, you know? Or German, maybe, but French, I don't know. So.
Well, you know how to cut the time down from 2,000 hours to almost nothing. You start the kids when they're really, really young.
Well, this is the other thing, you got to start young. Start young.
And our Chinese kids learn English even at the first grade of the primary school, all the way to the university education. Still, we feel English is not that easy to learn. But the Chinese, we really encourage our friends to learn it when your children are very young age, very easy to master the language. When you're at a certain age, it might be difficult to remember all kinds of the words and the pronunciation.
And that's the new movement in the Chinese language development in this country, is to start young. Not in high school, but in elementary school.
We're told more and more American friends now are interested in learning Chinese. We're very happy to hear that.
Well, let's leave on that hopeful note. I hope that you'll join us we have a whole series of U.S.-China discussions. I mentioned the music panel tomorrow, which should be fascinating. We also have movies and documentaries with great Chinese directors and American directors. We have Luisa Hoyos in the house back there, Oscar-winning director of The Cove. Family Shin is here. Lu Chuan is a movie screening tonight with a discussion afterwards. We have architecture panels with our artist in residence Liz Diller and the Chinese expert Yu Ning, and on and on. Orville, if you want to add any of those, I think it's a fascinating opportunity to have this discussion in this atmosphere following up on Beijing.
No, just consult your program and you'll see through it there is sort of a China thread, and we brought about 10 Chinese colleagues over, and it's a very nice addition.
All right. Thank you for joining us.